Alexander III of Macedon, known to history as Alexander the Great, was born on the 20th or 21st of July, 356 BC, in the ancient Greek kingdom of Macedon. From a young age, he was surrounded by power, ambition, and war. His father, King Philip II, had already made Macedon a rising force in Greece. When Philip was assassinated in 336 BC, Alexander, only 20 years old, took the throne. He founded over 20 cities, the most famous being Alexandria in Egypt, which later became a great center of knowledge and trade. The blending of Greek culture with local traditions led to new developments, such as Greco-Buddhism, Hellenistic Judaism, and the rise of a shared Greek language, Koine Greek, which became the common language of trade, politics, and learning for centuries. Through his conquests, Alexander became a legend. Many compared him to the great Homeric hero Achilles, and for generations, kings and generals measured their success by his example. His story was told and retold in countless books, poems, and legends. One of the most influential works inspired by his life, the Alexander Romance, spread across Europe and the Islamic world, becoming one of the most widely read texts of the ancient and medieval eras, second only to the Bible in popularity. Even today, Alexander the Great remains one of the most admired and studied military leaders in history. His strategies are still examined in military academies around the world, and his dream of a vast blended world of cultures continues to fascinate historians, writers, and storytellers. Alexander III, later known throughout history as Alexander the Great, was born in Pella, the vibrant capital of the Kingdom of Macedon. His birth took place on the 6th day of the ancient Greek month Hekatombion, a date that likely corresponds to the 20th of July, 356 BC, although the exact day remains uncertain because ancient calendars differed across regions. He was born into the powerful Argead dynasty, the ruling family of Macedon, as the son of King Philip II, an ambitious and brilliant monarch, and Olympias, Philip's fourth wife, a princess of Epirus and daughter of Neoptolemus I, the Aeacid king who proudly claimed descent from the heroic line of Achilles himself. Philip had as many as 7 or 8 wives over the course of his life, but Olympias held a uniquely influential place for many years, in part because she had given birth to the son who would one day conquer lands stretching from Greece to the edges of India. From the very beginning, legends surrounded Alexander's birth and childhood, becoming part of the rich tapestry that shaped his legacy. According to the ancient historian Plutarch, on the night before her marriage to Philip was consummated, Olympias dreamed that a thunderbolt struck her womb, and from it, a brilliant flame spread across the world before fading. Soon afterward, Philip dreamed that he placed a seal engraved with the image of a lion upon his wife's womb. Some later interpreters believed these dreams indicated that Olympias was already carrying a divine child, or that the true father of Alexander was not Philip, but the god Zeus. Writers and philosophers disagreed on whether Olympias encouraged this rumor to elevate her son's destiny or dismissed it as a story too sacred to speak of. On the day Alexander was born, extraordinary events were said to have taken place. Philip was preparing a siege against the city of Potidaea in Chalcidice when messengers brought remarkable news. His general Parmenion had just won a decisive victory over the Illyrians and Paeonians, and Philip's prized horses had triumphed in the Olympic Games. Even more astonishing, word spread that the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, had burned to the ground that very night. One Greek writer, Hegesias of Magnesia, later claimed that the temple burned because the goddess Artemis herself was absent, attending the birth of Alexander, another sign that he was destined for greatness. Many such legends were likely encouraged during Alexander's reign to support the belief that he was more than mortal. During his early childhood, Alexander was raised by his nurse Lanique, whose brother, Clitus the Black, would one day fight at Alexander's side in battle. As he grew, Alexander came under the strict instruction of Leonidas, a relative of his mother who taught him discipline and physical endurance, and Lysimachus of Acarnania, who encouraged his love for Greek literature by affectionately calling him Achilles, a name to which Alexander responded eagerly. Like all noble sons of Macedon, Alexander was trained in the arts of leadership and war. He learned to read and recite poetry, especially admiring Homer's Iliad, which would stay with him for life. He was taught to play the lyre, a skill treasured among Greek nobles, and he became skilled at riding horses, hunting wild game, and mastering weapons of war. These lessons shaped him into a youth of exceptional confidence and will. A famous story from his childhood revealed the bold spirit that set him apart. When Alexander was 10 years old, a horse dealer from Thessaly presented King Philip with a magnificent, powerful stallion costing a remarkable 13 talents, a fortune in that time. The horse, however, would allow no man to ride it. Snorting and rearing wildly, it threw every handler aside. Philip, frustrated, ordered it to be taken away. But Alexander stepped forward, observing that the horse was not vicious, only frightened by its own shadow. He asked permission to try, and though the crowd laughed, Philip allowed it. Alexander turned the horse toward the sun so that its shadow was behind them, spoke to it calmly, and then leaped onto its back. To the astonishment of all present, the horse obeyed and carried him at full speed across the field. When he returned, Philip was overcome with pride and embraced his son, saying, "My boy, you must find a kingdom large enough for your ambitions. Macedon is too small for you." The horse was purchased, and Alexander named it Bucephalus.
I hereby name you Bucephalus,
meaning ox head, perhaps for its massive, broad shape. Bucephalus became Alexander's closest companion in war, carrying him through countless battles across deserts, mountains, and rivers, from Greece all the way to India. When the faithful horse died many years later, said to be at the extraordinary age of 30, Alexander founded a city in his honor, calling it Bucephala, ensuring that the memory of his beloved companion would never fade. When Alexander reached the age of 13, King Philip II began seeking a tutor capable of shaping the mind of a boy already marked by extraordinary promise. He considered some of the greatest scholars of the Greek world, including the famed orator Isocrates and Speusippus, the head of Plato's academy in Athens. Speusippus was reportedly so eager for the opportunity that he even offered to resign his position at the academy in order to take personal charge of Alexander's education. Yet Philip had someone even more remarkable in mind: the brilliant philosopher Aristotle, already renowned as one of the greatest thinkers of his age. Philip arranged for a place of study in the peaceful temple of the nymphs at Mysa, a sanctuary surrounded by quiet gardens, flowing water, and shaded groves, an ideal retreat for learning. In exchange for accepting the role, Philip promised to rebuild Aristotle's hometown of Stagira, which he had previously destroyed, and to restore its people, either by buying and freeing those sold into slavery or by inviting those in exile to return home. This act reflected the immense value Philip placed on Aristotle's teaching. Mysa became something like a royal boarding school, not only for Alexander, but also for the sons of prominent Macedonian nobles. Among these students were Hephaestion, who would become Alexander's closest companion, Ptolemy, who would later rule Egypt, and Cassander, who would rule Macedon after Alexander's death. Together, these young men would one day be known across the world as the Companions, the trusted circle who marched with Alexander across 3 continents. Aristotle's curriculum was broad and demanding. He taught his pupils medicine, philosophy, ethics, religion, logic, rhetoric, and art, guiding them through questions about the nature of the world and the purpose of leadership. Under his instruction, Alexander developed a deep admiration for Homer, especially the Iliad, the epic tale of the warrior Achilles, whom Alexander regarded as a heroic model. Aristotle provided Alexander with a special annotated copy of the Iliad, a treasured possession that Alexander carried with him during his future campaigns, keeping it near his bedside as a source of inspiration in war. His education was so thorough that Alexander could quote the tragic playwright Euripides entirely from memory. During these formative years, Alexander also encountered a number of Persian exiles who lived at the Macedonian court under Philip's protection. For several years, they had opposed the Persian king Artaxerxes III, and among them were powerful nobles such as Artabazos II and his daughter Barsine, who many believe later became Alexander's mistress, Amenapes, a man who would one day serve Alexander as a satrap, and another nobleman known as Sicenes. Their presence allowed the Macedonian court to gain valuable insight into the politics, culture, and military practices of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, knowledge that may have influenced some of Philip's and later Alexander's administrative reforms. Some ancient sources also claim that the historian and rhetorician Anaximenes of Lampsacus played a role in Alexander's education and may even have accompanied him during his later campaigns, adding further intellectual influence to the young prince's remarkable upbringing. When Alexander reached the age of 16, his formal education under Aristotle came to an end, and he stepped more fully into the world of leadership that awaited him. His father, King Philip II, had launched a military campaign against the Thracians to the north, leaving the young prince as regent of Macedon, responsible for the kingdom in his absence. Despite his youth, Alexander soon faced a serious challenge. The Thracian tribe known as the Mede rose up in revolt. Showing the decisiveness that would define his later career, Alexander acted swiftly. He marched against the rebels, drove them from their territory, and secured the region for Macedon. To ensure lasting control, he established a new city there and named it Alexandropolis, marking one of the earliest places to carry his name. When Philip returned, he sent Alexander with a small force to suppress resistance in southern Thrace, where Macedonian power was still being contested. During the campaign near the city of Perinthus, Alexander was said to have saved his father's life in battle, strengthening the bond between them and proving his tactical abilities. Meanwhile, a new problem emerged further south. The city of Amphissa had begun cultivating lands considered sacred to Apollo near Delphi, a grave religious offense in the eyes of the Greek world. This sacrilege offered Philip an opportunity to once again intervene in Greek affairs. While he addressed matters in Thrace, he ordered Alexander to raise an army and march south. Fearing that neighboring Greek states might resist Macedon, Alexander cleverly spread false rumors suggesting that he was preparing to march west and attack Illyria instead. The deception did not go unnoticed, and in the confusion, the Illyrians invaded Macedon, believing the moment was right. Alexander reacted with speed and force, driving the Illyrians back and securing Macedon's western frontier. By 338 BC, Philip and Alexander joined forces and marched together. They crossed the narrow mountain pass at Thermopylae, capturing it despite resistance from the Theban garrison, and then advanced to occupy the strategic city of Elatea. News of their arrival sent shockwaves through Greece. In Athens, the orator Demosthenes convinced the assembly that Macedon's growing strength threatened their freedom. Athens and Thebes, old rivals, formed an alliance against Philip. Both Philip and the Athenians sent ambassadors to win Thebes to their side, but Athens prevailed, and the city joined the anti-Macedonian coalition. Philip then marched to Amphissa, captured the mercenaries stationed there, and accepted the city's surrender before returning to Elatea. He offered peace one final time, but Athens and Thebes rejected it, and so war was set. The decisive confrontation came near the town of Chaeronea in Boeotia, where the allied Greek forces blocked Philip's advance. In the famous Battle of Chaeronea, Philip commanded the right wing, while Alexander, still only 18, commanded the left, supported by some of Macedonia's most trusted generals. Ancient accounts describe the battle as fierce and hard-fought. Philip, a master of strategy, ordered a tactical retreat, drawing the Athenian soldiers forward and stretching their line until it fragmented. At that moment, Alexander led a powerful charge that broke through the elite Theban formation, including the famed Sacred Band. Philip's generals pushed forward, and the Macedonian army shattered its opponents. The Athenians were routed, and the Thebans, left isolated, were overwhelmed. With the Greek coalition defeated, Philip and Alexander marched south into the Peloponnese, facing no further resistance. Much of Laconia was devastated, and the Spartans were stripped of some of their territory. In the city of Corinth, Philip established a new alliance modeled on the great Greek coalitions of the Greco-Persian Wars. Nearly all Greek cities joined except Sparta, who refused. Philip was appointed hegemon, or supreme commander, of what modern historians call the League of Corinth, and he announced his long-intended plan, the invasion of the Persian Empire, a campaign that fate would leave to his son to complete. When Philip II returned to Pella after his campaigns, a new controversy arose in the royal court. In 338 BC, he fell deeply in love with and married Cleopatra Eurydice, a young Macedonian noblewoman and the niece of his powerful general Attalus. This marriage instantly threatened the position of Alexander, for while Alexander was the son of Philip, his mother Olympias was from Epirus, making him only half Macedonian, whereas any son born from Cleopatra Eurydice would be considered a fully Macedonian heir. The political implications were clear to everyone present, and tensions settled over the palace long before the wedding ceremonies began. At the great wedding banquet held to celebrate Philip's marriage, the guests drank heavily and the festivities were loud with music and pride. In his drunken enthusiasm, Attalus raised his cup and prayed publicly that the gods would grant the king a legitimate Macedonian successor through his niece. The insult was unmistakable, and it struck Alexander like a spear. His blood boiled, and in a flash of outrage, he hurled his drinking cup at Attalus, shouting, "You villain! Am I then to be called a bastard?" The hall erupted into shock. Philip, furious and emboldened by wine, took Attalus' side and lunged at his own son with a drawn sword. Yet, as Plutarch later recounted, whether from anger or too much wine, Philip stumbled and fell to the floor in front of the entire court. Alexander looked down at him with burning humiliation and scorn and said, "Look there, the man who prepares to cross from Europe into Asia, and yet he cannot cross from one seat to another." The feud at the wedding marked a breaking point in the family, and the Macedonian court was split into factions for and against Alexander. The tension grew until, in 337 BC, Alexander left Macedon alongside his mother, Olympias. Fearing for her safety as political threats increased, he escorted her to Dodona in Epirus, delivering her into the protection of her brother, King Alexander I of Epirus. Alexander himself then continued to Illyria, seeking refuge among the very Illyrian kings he had defeated in battle only a few years earlier, perhaps with King Glaucius. Remarkably, he was treated not as an enemy but as an honored guest, a sign of the respect his military skill had already earned. Despite the tensions, it seems Philip never truly intended to abandon or disown his son, who had been trained for rule since childhood. With the mediation of a trusted family friend, Demaratus of Corinth, father and son were reconciled, and after 6 months in exile, Alexander returned to Macedon. Yet peace did not last long. The next year, a diplomatic crisis shook the court once again. Pixodarus, the powerful Persian satrap of Caria, offered his eldest daughter in marriage, not to Alexander, but to his half-brother Philip Aridaeus, a prince of weaker birth and lesser education. This proposal alarmed Olympias and many of Alexander's closest companions, who believed that Philip might be positioning Aridaeus as his new heir. Alexander, reacting swiftly, sent an envoy, the actor Thessalus of Corinth, to tell Pixodarus that he should not offer his daughter to an illegitimate prince, but to Alexander, the rightful heir to Macedon. When Philip learned of this intervention, he was enraged. He immediately ended the marriage negotiations and rebuked Alexander harshly, telling him that such a marriage was unworthy of his rank and that he intended a greater, more powerful union for him. As punishment for the intrigue, Philip banished 4 of Alexander's closest friends, Harpalus, Nearchus, Ptolemy, and Arigius, sending them into exile, and demanded that Thessalus be brought back to Macedon in chains. These events deepened the hostility and distrust within the royal household, and the court continued to operate like a battlefield of influence and ambition. Within a short time, the tension would lead to tragedy, for Philip would soon be assassinated, and Alexander would ascend the throne of Macedon, carrying all these rivalries and suspicions into his future as the ruler of one of the greatest empires in history. When news of Philip's death spread through Macedon and beyond, Alexander moved rapidly to secure his throne and remove any threat that might challenge his authority. He began his reign by eliminating potential rivals, ordering the execution of his cousin, the former Amyntas IV, whose claim to the throne, though weaker, was still legitimate enough to attract opposition. 3 princes of Lyncestis were accused of taking part in Philip's assassination, and while 2 were put to death, Alexander spared the 3rd, Alexander of Lyncestis, perhaps because he had been the first noble to acknowledge him publicly as king. His mother Olympias, driven by fury, arranged the deaths of Cleopatra Eurydice and her young daughter Europa by setting them on fire. When Alexander learned of this, he was angered by the cruelty, but the deed had already been carried out. Meanwhile, Cleopatra's uncle Attalus, who commanded the advanced Macedonian forces in Asia Minor, was assassinated by Alexander's order, not only because he had once humiliated Alexander during Philip's wedding feast, but also because he had begun corresponding with the Athenian statesman Demosthenes and was suspected of planning to defect. Alexander spared his half-brother Philip Aridaeus, whose mental weakness made him harmless and possibly the victim of poisoning in earlier years. Philip's death emboldened many of the Greek cities and tribes that Macedon had subdued. Thebes, Athens, Thessaly, and several Thracian groups rose in revolt, believing the young king would not yet be strong enough to maintain the empire his father had built. Alexander, however, moved with remarkable speed. Though some counselors urged diplomacy, he gathered 3,000 cavalry and rode south at once. Reaching Thessaly, he found their forces blocking the pass between Mount Olympus and Mount Ossa, but instead of meeting them head-on, he led his cavalry over the slopes during the night. When the Thessalians awoke and saw Alexander positioned behind them, they surrendered at once and added their own cavalry to his growing army. With Thessaly secure, he marched south to Thermopylae, where he was recognized as the leader of the Amphictyonic League. Continuing to Corinth, he faced Athens, which now feared the swiftness and discipline of his forces and sued for peace. Alexander granted pardon to the rebels, choosing unity over punishment, for he knew that Greece must be secure before he could turn east toward Persia. While in Corinth, Alexander met the philosopher Diogenes the Cynic, who lived with almost no possessions and rejected all luxury. Standing before him, Alexander asked if there was anything he might do for him. Diogenes simply replied that yes, there was something.
Stand out of my sunlight.
Alexander could move aside, for he was blocking the sunlight. Instead of taking offense, the king admired the philosopher's independence and later told his companions, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." Despite the diplomacy, Alexander's responsibilities remained urgent. The Greek states confirmed him as hegemon, the supreme leader destined to carry out the great campaign against Persia, just as Philip had planned before his death. Even as he prepared for this vast undertaking, word arrived of a Thracian uprising, and once again, the 20-year-old king who intended to conquer Asia had to secure Macedon and Greece. Yet his response to revolt, his speed in war, and his capacity to bend powerful city-states to unity revealed to all that Alexander was not merely the heir of Philip, but a leader in his own right, one whose ambition and command would soon reshape the world. Before Alexander could carry out his father's long-planned invasion of the Persian Empire, he understood that Macedon's northern frontier had to be secured. Several tribes in the Balkans believed that with Philip II dead and a young king on the throne, Macedon would be slow or weak in response. Alexander intended to prove them wrong, and in the spring of 335 BC, he launched a campaign to crush the uprisings and ensure that no enemy could strike Macedon from behind once the army crossed into Asia. Beginning his march from Amphipolis, he moved eastward into the lands of the so-called independent Thracians, tribes who had never been fully subdued. The enemy had taken position along the heights of Mount Haemus, defending the narrow passes below. Alexander ordered an assault that demonstrated the discipline of the Macedonian phalanx, which advanced uphill despite the danger. The Thracians attempted to halt them by rolling wagons and carts laden with stones down the slopes, but the Macedonian formation opened its ranks to let the wagons pass through, then closed again and continued the climb. The attackers broke the Thracian resistance and seized the heights, scattering the defenders and proving the unmatched resilience of Alexander's infantry. From there, he marched north into the territory of the Triballi, whose warriors had gathered near the Liganus River, a tributary of the Danube. Alexander engaged them and forced their army to withdraw after a fierce battle. Pressing his advantage, he then led his troops for 3 days to reach the shores of the Danube River, where the Getae watched from the opposite bank. Seeing the tribe assembled with their cavalry and chariots, Alexander prepared a bold plan. Under cover of darkness, he constructed rafts and crossed the river at night. Landing on the northern shore before the Getae realized the scale of the operation. When morning came, his sudden appearance drove the Getae to retreat after only a brief cavalry clash, leaving their town and supplies to the Macedonians. No sooner had he secured his victories in Thrace than word arrived that Clitus, an Illyrian chieftain, and King Glaucius of the Talanti had risen in open revolt. Turning his army west, Alexander crossed the rugged terrain of Illyria and confronted the rebels separately, defeating each in turn. Clitus and Glaucius fled into the mountains with the remains of their forces, and the uprising collapsed. These victories were crucial. By routing the Thracians, Triballi, Getae, and Illyrian kings, Alexander secured the entire northern frontier and eliminated threats that might strike Macedon while he campaigned in Asia. With the Balkans subdued and his authority established beyond question, the young king was at last ready to turn his eyes eastward, toward the Persian Empire and the vast world he intended to conquer. While Alexander was still campaigning in the north, news reached him that Thebes and Athens had rebelled once more. Without delay, Alexander marched south at great speed. Many Greek cities hesitated, uncertain whether to join the revolt, but Thebes chose to stand and fight. The Thebans resisted, yet their efforts were no match for the Macedonian army. Alexander captured and destroyed the city, dividing its lands among the other Boeotian towns. The sudden fall of Thebes shocked the rest of Greece. Athens, frightened by the severity of Alexander's response, abandoned all thought of war and sought peace. With the threat of rebellion crushed, Greece fell quiet, and Alexander could finally turn toward the goal he had inherited from his father. Leaving Antipater behind as regent in Macedon, Alexander set out to begin his great Asian campaign, the conquest that would carry his name across the known world. Alexander's invasion of Persia is often regarded as one of history's greatest examples of a coherent strategic campaign, a masterpiece of planning in which every operation served a single, unified purpose. Soviet military theorist Alexander Svekin, in his work Strategy, describes how Alexander connected each phase of the war with clear logic and long-term vision. First, Alexander secured Greece and the Balkans, crushing political opposition so no rebellion would threaten his rear. Then he advanced along the Afro-Asian coastline, capturing the ports and bases that supported the Persian navy, effectively cutting off Persia's ability to control the seas or supply its forces. Only after eliminating these dangers did he move directly into the heart of the Persian Empire, forcing a confrontation on his own terms, deep within enemy territory. Svechin argued that in doing so, Alexander solved the ancient problem of sustaining a campaign far from home, and did so in a manner that remains exemplary in the history of military strategy. After the victory at Chaeronea in 338 BC, Philip II began shaping a grand plan to lead a united Greek alliance against the Persian Empire and avenge the wrongs committed during the invasions of Greece in 480 BC, as well as to liberate the Greek cities of Asia Minor from Achaemenid control. According to Diodorus, Philip envisioned a campaign that would finally free the western coast and islands from Persian rule. As preparation, in 336 BC, he sent an advance force into Anatolia under the command of Parmenion, Amyntas, Andromenes, Attalus, and others, numbering around 10,000 Macedonian and allied troops. Their task was to secure a foothold for the great invasion to come. However, the Greek cities of western Anatolia, hearing rumors that the Persians were vulnerable, revolted prematurely. The revolt stalled when news arrived across the Aegean that Philip II had been assassinated, and that his son, the 20-year-old Alexander, had become king. The Macedonian troops already in Asia lost heart, and near Magnesia, they were defeated by the Persian forces led by Memnon of Rhodes, the skilled Greek mercenary fighting for the Achaemenids. Yet Alexander did not abandon his father's plan. He enlarged it. Once he secured Greece and crushed rebellion in Thebes, he prepared to carry Macedonian power across the sea. In 334 BC, his army crossed the Hellespont into Asia. Ancient sources place his forces at approximately 48,100 infantry, 6,100 cavalry, and a fleet of 120 ships manned by 38,000 sailors, drawn from Macedon, Greek city-states, Thrace, Paeonia, and Illyria. When Alexander stepped onto Asian soil, he performed a symbolic act. He threw a spear into the land, proclaiming that he accepted Asia as a gift of the gods, and that he intended to claim it in battle, showing a decisiveness that surpassed Philip's cautious diplomacy. The campaign began with a bold engagement, the Battle of the Granicus. Alexander smashed the Persian forces there, demonstrating his fearlessness by leading the cavalry charge directly across the river. After the victory, he accepted the surrender of Sardis, the wealthy provincial capital and treasury, and then moved south along the Ionian coast, granting democracy and autonomy to the liberated Greek cities. The next major target was Miletus, defended by Achaemenid troops and Persian naval power. Alexander executed a careful siege and captured the city. Further south lay Halicarnassus, a fortified stronghold in Caria, defended by Memnon of Rhodes and the Persian satrap Orontobates. Here, Alexander conducted his first major siege, involving naval threats, night assaults, and heavy artillery. Eventually, unable to hold the city, Memnon and Orontobates fled by sea. In a gesture that won him local support, Alexander restored Caria to Ada, the last surviving member of the Hecatomnid dynasty. She formally adopted Alexander, who in turn declared her satrap, strengthening his political legitimacy in the region. Advancing from Halicarnassus, Alexander crossed into Lycia and the Pamphylian plain, capturing all coastal cities to ensure that the Persian fleet had no secure harbors. As the coastline offered fewer ports, he turned inland. Near Termessos, he chose not to storm the nearly impregnable Pisidian stronghold, instead humbling the city and forcing peace without unnecessary slaughter. Continuing into the interior of Phrygia, Alexander arrived at Gordium, the ancient capital. There, he encountered the legendary Gordian knot, an intricate knot tied to an ancient chariot, of which prophecy said, "Whoever unties this knot shall rule all Asia." After studying it, Alexander declared that it made no difference how the knot was undone, and, according to the most famous version of the tale, cut through it with his sword, claiming the prophecy for himself. With the coasts secured, the Greek cities liberated, and omens seemingly in his favor, Alexander pressed deeper into the Persian Empire. The campaign had only begun, and the world had yet to see its greatest victories: Issus, Tyre, Gaugamela, and beyond. In the spring of 333 BC, Alexander advanced from Asia Minor and crossed the Taurus Mountains into Cilicia. There, he halted for some time, struck by a sudden illness that forced his army to wait. Once recovered, he resumed his march towards Syria, only to learn that Darius III and his much larger Persian army had maneuvered behind him. Realizing the danger, Alexander turned back towards Cilicia with great speed. The two forces met near the coastal plain at Issus, where Alexander won a decisive victory. Darius fled the battlefield, abandoning not only his soldiers but also his mother Sisygambis, his wife, his two daughters, and an immense royal treasure. In an effort to recover his family, Darius sent envoys offering a peace agreement. He promised Alexander all the lands already lost and a ransom of 10,000 talents for the return of his captured relatives. Alexander refused, declaring that as the man who now held domination over Asia, it was he, not Darius, who had the authority to determine its division. After Issus, Alexander took control of Syria and most of the Levantine coast, moving steadily south. But in 332 BC, the powerful island city of Tyre refused to submit. Because Tyre controlled a key naval position, Alexander could not leave it unconquered. What followed was a long and difficult siege, one of the most challenging operations of his career. Alexander's engineers eventually built a massive causeway to reach the island's walls, and after fierce fighting, Tyre fell. The city faced a terrible punishment. The men of fighting age were killed, and the women and children sold into slavery as a warning to any city that might defy him. With Tyre subdued, Alexander held nearly the entire eastern Mediterranean coast, ensuring that the Persian navy no longer had major harbors from which to resist his advance. After the fall of Tyre, most of the cities along the route to Egypt surrendered without resistance. Only Gaza, a strongly fortified city built on a high mound, refused to yield. Its position made a direct assault extremely difficult, and when Alexander's engineers warned him that scaling the height would be nearly impossible, the challenge only strengthened his determination. For months, he besieged the fortress. After 3 failed assaults, the walls were finally breached, though Alexander himself suffered a serious wound to the shoulder during the fighting. As at Tyre, the defenders who were of military age were put to the sword, and the remaining population, women and children, was sold into slavery, demonstrating once again the harsh penalties for resistance. With Gaza subdued, the road to Egypt lay open, and when Alexander entered in late 332 BC, the Egyptians welcomed him as a liberator from Persian rule. Unlike other conquered regions, Egypt did not resent his foreign birth nor his frequent absence. He honored local traditions, visited ancient temples, and restored shrines that the Persians had neglected. At Memphis, he was crowned according to Egyptian rites in the Temple of Ptah. He built a new sanctuary for the sacred barge at Luxor, adjusted the nation's taxation system using Greek administrative models, and secured the region with a military presence. Alexander then made a famous journey across the desert to the Siwa oasis, where he consulted the oracle of Amun-Ra. There, priests proclaimed him to be the son of Amun, and from that time forward, Alexander embraced this divine connection, often referring to Zeus Ammon as his true father. After his death, coins would even depict him with the horns of Ammon, a symbol of royal divinity. The Greeks interpreted the oracle's declaration as a prophecy, foretelling his destiny as ruler of the world. During his brief stay in Egypt, Alexander founded a new city on the Mediterranean coast, Alexandria, which would later become one of the greatest cities of the ancient world and the capital of the Ptolemaic kingdom. After Alexander's death, Egypt passed into the hands of Ptolemy I, one of his most trusted companions, marking the beginning of the Ptolemaic dynasty, which would rule until 30 BC. With Egypt secure and his divine status confirmed, Alexander turned once more toward Asia, continuing his pursuit of the Persian king Darius III and the conquest of the empire he believed the gods had granted him. After securing Egypt, Alexander departed in 331 BC and marched eastward into Achaemenid Assyria, in the region of Upper Mesopotamia, what is now northern Iraq. There, on the plains near Gaugamela, he met Darius III once more. The Persian king had assembled a vast army and carefully chosen the battlefield, hoping that the open ground would allow his superior numbers and war chariots to overwhelm the Macedonian forces. But Alexander's tactics, discipline, and timing again proved superior. In the fiercely fought Battle of Gaugamela, Alexander shattered Darius's line and forced him to flee. The defeat was decisive, and although Alexander pursued Darius as far as Arbela, the Persian king managed to escape over the mountains toward Ecbatana, the modern city of Hamadan in Iran. Gaugamela would be the final and most important clash between the two rulers. The fate of the Persian Empire was effectively sealed on that field. After the battle, Alexander marched south and took possession of the great city of Babylon, one of the richest and most ancient capitals of the Near East. Babylonian records preserve a remarkable detail about his approach. The astronomical diaries state that the king of the world, Alexander, sent his scouts ahead with a message assuring the people, "I shall not enter your houses." The statement helped calm the citizens, signaling that he intended no violent sack of the city. When Alexander entered Babylon, he was welcomed with ceremony, gifts, and honor, marking another step in his transformation from Macedonian king to ruler of a vast multicultural empire. After taking Babylon, Alexander advanced to Susa, one of the principal capitals of the Achaemenid Empire, where he seized the vast royal treasury. From there, he sent the larger part of his army along the Persian royal road toward Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of Persian kings. With a smaller, specially chosen force, Alexander took a more direct and dangerous path toward the city. His route led through the narrow and heavily defended mountain pass known as the Persian Gate in the modern Zagros Mountains. The pass was held by Persian forces under Ariobarzanes, who had blocked the way with fortifications. In a difficult and bloody assault, Alexander forced the passage and broke through the defenses, opening the way to Persepolis and preventing its garrison from plundering the royal treasury before he arrived. When Alexander entered Persepolis, he allowed his soldiers to loot the city for several days, a stark contrast to his more restrained treatment of Babylon. The immense wealth of the Persian Empire poured into Macedonian hands. Alexander remained in Persepolis for about 5 months, during which a dramatic and controversial event occurred. A fire swept through the palaces of Xerxes I. Ancient sources disagree about the cause. Some suggest it may have been a drunken accident during celebration. Others believe it was an act of revenge for the burning of the Athenian Acropolis during the Persian invasion led by Xerxes a century and a half earlier. According to Plutarch and Diodorus, the fire was encouraged, perhaps even ignited, by Thais, an Athenian companion, a hetera, who urged Alexander to take vengeance on Persia for its past offenses. As flames consumed the palaces, Alexander is said to have watched the destruction, only to feel immediate regret. Plutarch writes that he soon ordered the fires to be extinguished, though by then the destruction had spread too far. Other historians, such as Curtius, claim that his remorse came only the next morning, when he saw that an irreplaceable monument of Persian greatness had been destroyed. Plutarch even preserves a striking anecdote. Alexander, pausing before a toppled statue of Xerxes, spoke to it as though it were alive, debating whether he should leave it lying in the dust for the invasion of Greece, or raise it again because of the king's other virtues and acts of generosity. With Persepolis in ruins and the Persian heartland under his control, Alexander's conquest of the Achaemenid Empire was nearing completion, though the pursuit of Darius III and the resistance of the East would continue. After the fall of Persepolis, Alexander continued his pursuit of Darius III, driving eastward first into Media and then into Parthia. By this point, the Persian king had lost nearly all authority and could no longer command the loyalty of his remaining satraps. He was seized by Bessus, the satrap of Bactria, and a relative of Darius, who hoped to use the king as a bargaining tool. But as Alexander's forces drew near, Bessus had Darius mortally stabbed, abandoning him on the roadside before fleeing toward Central Asia, where he proclaimed himself the new Persian king under the name Artaxerxes V, intending to wage a guerrilla war against Alexander. Alexander came upon the dying Darius too late to save him. According to some ancient accounts, Darius declared with his last breaths that Alexander was to be his legitimate successor, though historians debate whether this claim was a political invention designed to strengthen Alexander's right to rule. Regardless, Alexander had Darius's body taken with full royal honor and buried alongside the Achaemenid kings at Persepolis, marking the symbolic end of the Achaemenid Empire. As historian Pierre Briand observes, because Alexander preserved much of the Persian system of government and maintained its traditions while ruling in his own name, he could be regarded in a sense as the last of the Achaemenids. Determined to punish Bessus for murdering a king he now claimed as his predecessor, Alexander launched a vast campaign through Central Asia. What began as a march against a usurper became a long and arduous conquest that took him across Media, Parthia, Aria, Drangiana, Arachosia, Bactria, and into Sogdiana and the lands bordering Scythia. Along the way, he founded multiple new cities, each named Alexandria, including the settlement that would become Kandahar in modern Afghanistan and Alexandria Eshate, the furthest, in present-day Tajikistan. In 329 BC, a Sogdian leader named Spidomenes, who held influence in the region, betrayed Bessus to Ptolemy, one of Alexander's trusted companions. Bessus was captured, condemned, and executed for his crimes. Yet Spidomenes soon turned against Alexander as well. While Alexander was occupied defending the Jaxartes River frontier against mounted nomads, Spidomenes incited a powerful revolt throughout Sogdiana. Alexander first crushed the nomad incursion in the Battle of the Jaxartes, then rapidly redirected his forces to confront the rebellion. At the Battle of Gabai, Alexander's army defeated Spidomenes, whose followers, realizing the cause was lost, killed him and offered peace to the Macedonian king. Through these campaigns, Alexander secured control of the eastern regions of the former Persian Empire. Yet the struggles in Central Asia would mark some of the most challenging years of his journey, shaping the identity of his army and deepening the fusion of Greek and Persian cultures within his expanding dominion. During his campaigns in Central Asia, Alexander began adopting certain features of Persian royal customs, including elements of Persian dress and court ceremony. One of the most controversial of these practices was proskynesis, a gesture that involved bowing or even prostration before someone of higher rank. Among the Persians, this custom was a sign of deep respect shown to kings and nobles. But to Greeks and Macedonians, it was a gesture reserved only for the gods, never for mortals. As rumors spread that Alexander expected proskynesis at his court, many of his Macedonian companions grew uneasy, believing he now sought divine honors and had begun to distance himself from their shared traditions. Although Alexander defended the practice as a political necessity intended to secure the loyalty of Persian elites, the resentment it caused eventually persuaded him to abandon the custom. This conflict at court reflected a larger challenge confronting Alexander. For generations, the Achaemenid Empire had preserved its stability by ensuring that the highest positions in government, the army, and the provincial satrapies were held by Iranians, especially those linked by blood or marriage to the royal family. Alexander recognized that if he were to rule effectively over former Persian domains, he could not rely solely on Macedonians and Greeks. He needed the cooperation of influential Iranian aristocrats as well. According to historian Pierre Briand, Alexander understood that winning the empire required more than military victory. He needed to restore a functional central administration, and that meant working with the very people who had sustained Persian power for centuries. Even early in the conquest, Alexander signaled that he saw himself as a legitimate heir to the Achaemenid tradition. In 332 BC, he wrote to Darius III, claiming that he was more worthy than Darius to rule Asia and to inherit the Achaemenid throne. But when he later allowed the burning of the palace at Persepolis, and many Persians turned against him, the idea that he could simply replace Darius as a legitimate Persian king became harder to sustain. Against Bessus, who murdered Darius and declared himself Artaxerxes I, Alexander took a different approach, presenting himself as the avenger of Darius and punishing Bessus not only as a rebel, but as a traitor to Persian kingship. Tensions continued to grow within Alexander's inner circle. A plot against his life was uncovered, and one of his senior officers, Philotas, was accused of failing to report it. Philotas was executed for treason, and because his father, the veteran general Parmenion, commanded the treasury at Ecbatana, Alexander ordered his death as well, fearing reprisals. Soon after, another tragic event took place. In a violent drunken quarrel at Maracanda, modern Samarkand, Alexander personally killed Cletus the Black, the officer who had once saved his life at the Battle of the Granicus. Cletus accused Alexander of abandoning Macedonian customs and adopting a corrupt Oriental lifestyle, and Alexander, consumed by anger and wine, struck him down, an act he deeply regretted as soon as he regained his senses. Later in Central Asia, yet another conspiracy emerged, this time involving some of Alexander's own royal pages. The official historian Callisthenes of Olynthus, who had previously opposed the introduction of proskynesis and criticized Alexander's changing court culture, was implicated. Ancient accounts differ on whether Callisthenes had any part in the plot, but he was arrested along with the pages and, according to Arrian, was tortured and likely died soon afterward. Whether guilty or simply a casualty of political suspicion, Callisthenes became another reminder of how far Alexander had traveled from the world in which he began, and how heavy the cost of empire had become. When Alexander departed for Asia, he entrusted the governance of Macedon to his seasoned general Antipater, a veteran statesman and one of the most trusted commanders from Philip II's Old Guard. With the brutal destruction of Thebes, Alexander had ensured that Greece remained subdued during his absence, and Antipater's task was to preserve that stability. For the most part, the Greek world remained quiet, but in 331 BC, King Agis III of Sparta attempted a last stand against Macedonian dominance. Antipater marched south, confronted him at the Battle of Megalopolis, and won a decisive victory in which Agis was killed. Rather than imposing punishment directly, Antipater referred the matter to the League of Corinth, which then deferred to Alexander himself. The king, showing a degree of magnanimity, chose to pardon the Spartans, preserving at least a symbolic unity among the Greek states. Despite this outward order, tensions simmered at home. Antipater and Olympias, Alexander's mother, clashed repeatedly as each accused the other of overstepping authority and acting in bad faith. They sent messages to Alexander in Asia, seeking his support, which added political strain even from a distance. Overall, however, Greece experienced an unusual period of peace and prosperity, while Alexander campaigned across Asia. Vast amounts of wealth, gold, silver, and other spoils from conquered lands, were sent back to Macedon and the Greek cities, strengthening commerce and expanding trade networks throughout the Mediterranean. Yet this prosperity had a hidden cost. Alexander's relentless demand for fresh soldiers and administrators to serve in his growing empire, combined with the migration of Macedonians into newly founded cities across Asia, drained the population and weakened Macedon itself. After Alexander's death, this gradual exhaustion of resources made the kingdom increasingly vulnerable, contributing to its eventual defeat and subjugation by Rome after the Third Macedonian War, 171 to 168 BC. Thus, while Alexander's empire stretched across continents, the homeland that had birthed it was slowly losing the strength that had carried him to such heights. Long before Alexander began his campaigns, Philip II had already strengthened Macedon's economic foundation. Between 356 and 342 BC, Philip conquered the rich mining districts of Mount Pangaeum, and later the island of Thasos, bringing under Macedonian control some of the most profitable gold and silver mines in the northern Aegean. The wealth drawn from these sources played a crucial role in financing both Philip's military reforms and the early stages of Alexander's conquests. Following his victory over Darius at the Battle of Issus in 333 BC, Alexander introduced a new and influential imperial coinage in Tarsus, Cilicia. These coins soon spread across his expanding territories and became the dominant currency of the empire. Alexander's minting included gold staters, silver tetradrachms and drachms, and various smaller bronze denominations. Remarkably, the basic imagery and design of these coins remained consistent across his domains, reinforcing both economic unity and the king's authority. The gold coins typically bore the image of Athena, the goddess of wisdom and warfare, on the obverse, while the reverse depicted Nike, the winged goddess of victory, an unmistakable symbol of Alexander's military success. The silver coinage featured a beardless Heracles wearing the lion skin headdress of the Nemean lion on one side, and on the other, Zeus Edaphoros, Zeus enthroned and holding an eagle and scepter. These choices reflected both Greek and local cultural elements. For Macedonians, Heracles was revered as the mythic ancestor of the Temenid dynasty, and Zeus was the chief deity of Macedon, linked to the sanctuary at Dium. Yet the imagery also resonated with Anatolian traditions. The lion symbol connected with Sandas, an Anatolian god honored in Tarsus, and the seated Zeus closely resembled Baltars, the deity featured on earlier Persian coinage minted under the satrap Mazaeus. Despite the spread of Alexander's new currency, he did not impose a uniform monetary system across all conquered territories. Persian coins continued to circulate throughout the satrapies, demonstrating Alexander's pragmatic approach to imperial rule. Rather than replacing established systems overnight, he allowed regional currencies to function alongside his own, facilitating trade, stability, and economic continuity throughout his multicultural empire. After the death of Spitamenes, and to strengthen relations with his newly subdued eastern satrapies, Alexander married Roxana, Old Iranian, Rauxna, a noblewoman of Bactria. With Central Asia largely secured, he then turned his attention toward the Indian subcontinent, beginning a campaign that would expand his empire farther than any Macedonian had ever imagined. He summoned the local rulers of Gandhara, a region now spanning eastern Afghanistan and northern Pakistan, and demanded their submission. Omphis, known in Indian tradition as Ambi, ruler of Taxila, agreed without hesitation, presenting himself before Alexander with rich offerings. But several hill tribes, including the Aspasioi and Asakanoi, branches of the Kamboyas, also called Ashvayanas and Ashvakayanas in Indian texts, refused to yield, preparing instead for armed resistance. Ambi sought to prove his loyalty with generous hospitality. He provided Alexander not only with provisions but also with Persian garments, gold and silver ornaments, 30 horses, and 1,000 talents of gold. In return, Alexander confirmed Ambi's royal status and territory. Strengthened by this alliance, Alexander divided his forces, allowing Ambi to assist Hephaestion and Perdiccas in constructing a bridge across the Indus River at Hund. Alexander and his army then entered Taxila, where they were welcomed with great ceremony and gifts, a demonstration meant to show all India that Macedon and Taxila stood united. When Alexander advanced further, Ambi accompanied him with a force of about 5,000 soldiers, participating in the monumental Battle of the Hydaspes. After Alexander's victory, Ambi was sent as an envoy to the defeated king Porus to offer favorable peace terms. Porus nearly killed him, remembering old rivalries, but Alexander intervened and personally reconciled the two Indian rulers. In return for his loyalty, Ambi was entrusted with governing the territory between the Indus and the Hydaspes, and after Alexander's death, he retained his authority through the partitions at Triparadisus in 321 BC. In the winter of 327/326 BC, Alexander personally led his troops against the rugged hill clans who had refused submission. A fierce campaign followed. The Aspacioi of the Kunar Valley fought with ferocity, wounding Alexander in the shoulder with a dart before they were defeated. The Macedonians then turned against the Asakanoi, who resisted from well-fortified positions at Massaga, Ora, and Aornos. The siege of Massaga was especially brutal. Alexander was wounded in the ankle, and according to Curtius, the city was utterly destroyed, its population massacred, and its buildings reduced to rubble. A similar fate met Ora, and when the surviving Asakenians fled to the towering fortress of Aornos, Alexander pursued them and captured the stronghold after 4 bloody days, securing full control of the region. From there, Alexander crossed the Indus and faced his most famous Indian opponent, King Porus, whose territory lay between the Hydaspes, Jhelum, and the Assassines, Chenab. In the legendary Battle of the Hydaspes in 326 BC, fought amid monsoon rains and war elephants, Alexander won one of the hardest victories of his career. Impressed by Porus's courage, Alexander not only spared him but made him an ally, allowing him to retain his kingdom and granting him additional territory as far as the Hyphasis, Beas. This policy of appointing local rulers helped stabilize a land far from Macedon. On opposite banks of the Hydaspes, Alexander founded 2 new cities: Bucephala, named in honor of his beloved horse Bucephalus, who died around this time, and Nicaea, Victory, traditionally associated with the site of modern-day Maung in Punjab. Ancient authors also record a striking detail. According to Philostratus, one of Porus's elephants fought so valiantly that Alexander dedicated it to Helios, the sun, naming the animal Ajax and having its tusks adorned with golden rings inscribed in Greek. Alexander, son of Zeus, dedicates Ajax to Helios. With Porus now an ally and new cities founded, Alexander had firmly established Macedonian power deep inside India. Yet his army had marched farther than any before them, and greater challenges still awaited beyond the Hyphasis. Beyond the lands ruled by Porus, Alexander learned of far greater powers to the east. Near the Ganges River lay the vast Nanda Empire of Magadha, and farther still, in the Bengal region, the powerful Gangaradai Empire. Reports reached the Macedonians describing enormous armies, countless war elephants, and cities unlike any they had seen. Having marched for years, crossing mountains, deserts, and rivers, the army reached the banks of the Hyphasis River, Baz. There, weary and anxious about facing fresh empires with massive forces, the soldiers mutinied, refusing to march any farther. Thus, the Hyphasis marked the easternmost boundary of Alexander's vast conquests. Greek sources describe the soldiers' reasoning vividly. They had barely prevailed against Porus, whose army numbered only 20,000 infantry and 2,000 cavalry. And now they heard that the rulers of the Gandarites and Praesii awaited them with forces of almost unimaginable size: 80,000 horsemen, 200,000 infantry, 8,000 war chariots, and 6,000 elephants. They also learned that the Ganges itself was said to be 32 furlongs wide, about 6.4 kilometers, and incredibly deep, its far bank filled with warriors and elephants ready to fight. For the Macedonians, these descriptions broke their resolve. As one historian wrote, the struggle against Porus had blunted their courage and convinced them that pressing eastward meant certain destruction. Alexander tried to convince his troops to continue, appealing to their pride and ambition. But Conus, one of his senior generals, spoke on behalf of the army. The men, he said, longed to see their parents, wives, children, and homeland again. Realizing that forcing a march would only invite rebellion, Alexander finally relented and turned back. He directed his army southward along the Indus River, subduing the Malians, and other peoples along the way. During the assault on the Malian citadel near modern Multan, Alexander was struck by an arrow that pierced his armor and lodged deep into his lung. For a moment, it was believed that the king might die, but he recovered, though he never fully regained his former strength. After reaching the delta of the Indus, Alexander began preparations to return to Persia. He sent a large part of his army west under Craterus toward Carmania in modern southern Iran, and ordered his admiral Nearchus to sail along the coastline and explore the shores of the Persian Gulf. Alexander himself chose the harsher route, leading a substantial force through the Gedrosian Desert and the Mekran, one of the most difficult marches of his entire campaign. The crossing proved brutal. Scorching heat, a lack of water, and relentless sandstorms caused terrible losses among his men. Exhausted and diminished, Alexander finally reached Susa in 324 BC, though many soldiers had died along the way. The return marked the beginning of the final stage of his reign, as the king sought to unify the peoples of his empire and prepare new plans his early death would prevent from unfolding. As Alexander marched back towards Susa, he discovered disturbing reports. Many of the satraps and military governors he had entrusted with authority had abused their power in his absence. Determined to restore discipline and send a message that corruption would not be tolerated, he ordered several of them to be executed as examples while others were removed from their offices. This harsh correction marked his attempt to re-establish firm control over the far-stretching empire that had grown faster than its administration could manage. To restore morale and reward loyalty, Alexander announced that he would pay off all debts owed by his soldiers. He also declared that the overaged and disabled veterans deserved rest and would be sent home to Macedon under the command of Craterus. His intention was meant as an honor, but many troops misunderstood, believing instead that their king meant to dismiss them and replace them permanently with Persians. Resentment over Alexander's adoption of Persian dress, customs, and the inclusion of Persian officers had already simmered beneath the surface, and at Opis, this frustration erupted into mutiny. For 3 tense days, the army refused to yield, openly questioning Alexander's leadership and accusing him of turning his back on the Macedonian identity. At last, when reasoning failed, Alexander struck back with a bold symbolic act. He appointed Persians to high command positions, granting them Macedonian military titles and authority. Shocked that the king was prepared to move forward without them, the Macedonians quickly begged for forgiveness. Alexander accepted their plea and soon held a grand reconciliation banquet, a massive celebration where several thousand Macedonian and Persian soldiers feasted together, an attempt to forge unity within the diverse empire he envisioned. Seeking to solidify this cultural fusion further, Alexander organized a mass marriage ceremony at Susa. Many of his senior officers were wed to Persian and noblewomen from other local dynasties, mirroring Alexander's own political marriage to Roxana earlier in the campaign. Though intended to bind the empire's ruling class together, few of these marriages survived even a year. Not long after, Alexander reached Pasargadae, where he learned that the sacred tomb of Cyrus the Great had been desecrated by its guards. Furious, he ordered the offenders executed, for he had admired Cyrus since youth and regarded him as a model ruler, having studied Xenophon's Cyropaedia, which praised Cyrus as a courageous general and wise lawgiver. He commanded his architect Aristobulus to restore and beautify the sepulchral chamber so that the memory of the founder of the Achaemenid Empire would be honored. Alexander then traveled to Ecbatana to retrieve the remainder of the Persian treasury. But there tragedy struck. His closest and most beloved companion, Hephaestion, fell ill and died suddenly. Overwhelmed by grief, Alexander ordered a lavish funeral pyre in Babylon and decreed a period of public mourning throughout the empire. Those who saw him in these days spoke of a king nearly broken by sorrow, his ambition overshadowed by personal loss. Returning to Babylon, Alexander turned again to visions of conquest. He began planning a new campaign, a grand invasion of Arabia, driven by the same relentless desire for exploration and dominion that had carried him across 3 continents. But fate would intervene before this final ambition could unfold. On either 10th or 11th June, 323 BC, the extraordinary life of Alexander the Great came to an end inside the grand palace of Nebuchadnezzar II in Babylon. He was only 32 years old, yet he had conquered lands stretching from Greece to Egypt and deep into Asia. His death, sudden and shrouded in mystery, became one of the most debated events in ancient history. Ancient sources preserve 2 principal versions of Alexander's final days. According to Plutarch, roughly 2 weeks before his death, the king enjoyed a long night of drinking in the company of his admiral Nearchus, and later with his friend Medius of Larissa. Soon after, Alexander developed a high fever that steadily worsened until he could no longer speak. As news spread that the king lay gravely ill, the Macedonian soldiers, fiercely loyal to him, begged to see him one last time. They were permitted to pass quietly by his bedside, while Alexander, unable to speak, raised his hand in silent farewell. The historian Diodorus, however, offered a different account. He claimed that during a banquet, Alexander drank a large bowl of unmixed wine in honor of Heracles, and was immediately struck by severe pain. For 11 days he grew weaker, though he did not develop a fever, eventually dying in agony. Arrian acknowledged that this alternative tale existed, but Plutarch firmly rejected it. Because Alexander was young and the Macedonian aristocracy had a long history of violent political intrigue, many ancient writers considered poisoning a possible explanation. The theory appears in the writings of Diodorus, Plutarch, Arrian, and Justin, though some included it only to complete the record. According to these accounts, the suspected mastermind was Antipater, the former viceroy of Macedon, who had recently fallen out of favor after being replaced by Craterus. Fearing that Alexander's summons to Babylon signaled his own execution, Antipater allegedly arranged for Alexander to be poisoned by his son Aeolus, the king's personal wine pourer. Some rumors even implicated Aristotle, though no evidence supports this claim. The strongest argument against the poisoning theory is that Alexander lived 12 days after his symptoms began, and a poison that's slow and effective was unlikely to have existed at the time. However, modern research has revived interest in the idea. In 2003, a BBC investigation led by toxicologist Leo Shep proposed that Alexander may have been poisoned with white hellebore, Veratrum album, a plant known in antiquity that can cause a long, painful decline. A 2014 scholarly article supported this possibility, describing symptoms that align with ancient accounts. Another hypothesis, published in 2010, suggested that Alexander may have drunk water from a river linked to the mythic Styx, contaminated with deadly caliciamycin-producing bacteria. Other historians and medical researchers have pointed to natural causes. Proposed explanations include malaria, typhoid fever, West Nile virus, Guillain-Barré syndrome, and severe internal infections such as acute pancreatitis or pyogenic meningitis. A widely discussed 1998 study in the New England Journal of Medicine suggested that Alexander likely died of typhoid fever, complicated by bowel perforation and paralysis. These theories also emphasize that Alexander's health had likely deteriorated after years of relentless campaigning, numerous severe battle wounds, and heavy drinking. The overwhelming grief he suffered after the death of his closest companion, Hephaestion, may even have contributed to his physical decline. Whether his end came by illness or conspiracy, the death of Alexander the Great plunged his vast empire into uncertainty, setting the stage for conflict, division, and the rise of the successor kingdoms that would reshape the ancient world. After Alexander the Great died, His body was prepared with the honors given to a king whose conquest had reshaped the world. His remains were placed inside an elaborate gold sarcophagus, shaped like a human body and filled with honey to preserve it. This golden coffin was then enclosed within an even larger golden casket. According to the writer Aelian, a seer named Aristotle prophesied that the land where Alexander was finally buried would be happy and unconquerable forever. More likely, however, Alexander's successors understood that whoever possessed the king's body could claim political legitimacy, since burying a ruler had long been a royal privilege. As the magnificent funeral procession began its journey toward Macedon, the cortege never reached its intended destination. Ptolemy, one of Alexander's leading generals, intercepted the procession and redirected it to Memphis in Egypt. Later, his successor Ptolemy II Philadelphus moved Alexander's sarcophagus to Alexandria, where it remained for centuries and became one of the most famous tombs of the ancient world. Over time, the tomb itself became a symbol of power. Ptolemy IX Lithyros, one of the last rulers of the dynasty, is said to have removed Alexander's original gold sarcophagus and replaced it with a glass one, using the gold to mint new coins. Many generations later, great Roman leaders came to Alexandria to gaze upon the body of the legendary conqueror. Pompey, Julius Caesar, and Augustus all visited the tomb. When Augustus saw Alexander's preserved remains, he reportedly leaned too close and accidentally broke the nose of the mummified king. Caligula later removed Alexander's breastplate from the tomb and wore it himself. By around AD 200, Emperor Septimius Severus ordered the tomb closed to the public, perhaps fearing it had become a dangerous rallying symbol. His son Caracalla, an admirer of Alexander, visited the tomb during his reign, but after this period the fate of Alexander's resting place becomes unclear, and its location has been lost to history. In 2014, the discovery of a massive burial complex at Amphipolis in northern Greece sparked speculation that it might have been intended for Alexander. Although this would match the known route of his original funeral procession, archaeologists later found that the monument was dedicated to Hephaestion, Alexander's closest friend and most trusted companion. Another famous artifact, the so-called Alexander sarcophagus, was unearthed near Sidon and is now displayed in the Istanbul Archaeology Museum. Despite its name, it did not contain Alexander's body. Instead, the beautifully carved reliefs portray Alexander and his companions in scenes of battle against the Persians and royal hunting, which led early scholars to associate it with him. It was long believed to have been the sarcophagus of Abdalonemus, king of Sidon appointed by Alexander after the Battle of Issus in 332 BC, though later research suggested it may have been created even earlier. In the turbulent years after Alexander's death, the empire he built began to tear itself apart. The Athenian statesman Demades compared the Macedonian army to a blinded cyclops, staggering in confusion, while another observer, Leosthenes, said the rival generals groped in uncertainty like the same cyclops, searching for direction after losing its single eye. Their words captured the chaos that followed. The sudden absence of the great king left his vast empire without a clear leader, and the world he had conquered would soon fracture among his ambitious successors. After Alexander the Great's sudden death, confusion and disbelief spread quickly across his empire. When the news finally reached Greece, many refused to believe it, unable to imagine that a man who had conquered so much could be gone so unexpectedly. Alexander left no clear heir. His wife Roxane was pregnant, and their son, Alexander IV, would not be born until after the king's death. Although he also had a half-brother, Philip Aridaeus, Philip struggled with cognitive disabilities and was not seen as a strong ruler. Ancient historians recorded several versions of Alexander's final instructions regarding succession. According to Diodorus, when asked to whom he left his vast empire, the dying king whispered a short but powerful phrase,
To the strongest. To the strongest.
"To the strongest." Some later writers suggested that this might have been misunderstood, and that Alexander may have intended to name Craterus, one of his most capable generals, whose name sounded similar in Greek. Other sources, like Arrian and Plutarch, doubted the story entirely, claiming that Alexander could no longer speak at all. Another tradition held that in front of witnesses, Alexander handed his signet ring to Perdiccas, one of his leading officers, and thereby indicated that he wished him to guide the empire. Perdiccas did not immediately seize power. Instead, he proposed a compromise. They should wait for the birth of Roxane's child, and if it was a son, that child should become king. Perdiccas suggested that he, Craterus, Leonidas, and Antipater serve as guardians of the royal family. However, this plan angered the Macedonian infantry, led by the officer Meleager, who felt shut out of the decision. They insisted that Alexander's half-brother, Philip Aridaeus, be declared king instead. Tensions rose dangerously, but eventually both sides reached an agreement. When Roxane later gave birth to a son, the two boys, Philip III Aridaeus and Alexander IV, were acknowledged as joint kings, though in reality they ruled only in name. The true power remained in the hands of Alexander's ambitious generals. This uneasy arrangement began to crumble almost immediately. The empire was divided among the generals in what became known as the Partition of Babylon, each receiving a satrapy, province, that would eventually serve as a power base for personal ambition. Rivalries deepened, and in 321 BC, the fragile balance shattered when Perdiccas was assassinated. With his death, any hope of unity dissolved, and a long struggle for domination erupted. For nearly 40 years, Alexander's former commanders, now called the Diadochi, or successors, fought bitter wars against one another. Alliances shifted, cities were besieged, and vast armies marched across the territories Alexander had once ruled. During this chaos, both supposed kings, Alexander IV and Philip III, were murdered, victims of political manipulation and fear of their future claims. When the wars finally came to an end, Alexander's empire had split into three major Hellenistic kingdoms. 1. The Ptolemaic Kingdom in Egypt. 2. The Seleucid Empire stretching through Syria and the East. 3. The Antigonid Kingdom in Macedon and parts of Greece. These successor states continued to shape the ancient world for centuries, carrying forward elements of Greek culture blended with local traditions, one of the most enduring legacies of Alexander the Great. According to the ancient historian Diodorus, Alexander the Great had prepared a set of detailed instructions before his death and entrusted them to his general Craterus. These instructions later came to be known as Alexander's last plans. Craterus began to carry them out, but after Alexander's passing, the leading successors refused to continue with the project, arguing that the plans were far too ambitious, impractical, and extravagant to be achieved. In Babylon, Perdiccas even read the contents of Alexander's notebooks aloud to the assembled Macedonian troops, who ultimately voted against fulfilling them. Diodorus described these final plans as nothing less than a sweeping vision for a transformed world, one that reached far beyond the borders of Alexander's vast empire. The plans focused on further military expansion, breathtaking monumental architecture, and a bold idea: the mixing of Eastern and Western populations to create unity among the peoples of the known world. Alexander's last plans reportedly included a massive fleet-building program, construction of 1,000 enormous ships, larger than the famous triremes of Greece, supported by new harbors and a road system running along the northern coast of Africa all the way to the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar. This fleet was intended for a future invasion of Carthage and campaigns into the Western Mediterranean. Grand temples across the Greek world. The construction of enormous temples at Delos, Delphi, Dodona, Dium, and Amphipolis, each costing more than 1,500 talents, as well as a magnificent temple to Athena at Troy, honoring the legendary Greek past. A new world of cities and blended cultures. A program to combine small towns into large, thriving cities, a process known as synoecism, and an intentional exchange of populations, moving settlers from Asia to Europe and from Europe to Asia. Alexander envisioned the peoples of the vast world becoming connected through intermarriage, shared families, and common identity, eliminating old divisions between cultures. A monumental tomb for Philip II, a colossal tomb for Alexander's father, Philip II, designed to rival the Great Pyramids of Egypt, honoring the man who built the foundation of the Macedonian Empire. The conquest of Arabia. The circumnavigation of Africa. These visions, if real, would have transformed the ancient world on an unimaginable scale, and may represent the grandest imperial plans in recorded history. Yet many scholars have questioned whether these plans were truly Alexander's. Some, like historian Ernst Badian, suggest that Perdiccas exaggerated the scale of the ideas to ensure the army rejected them. Others believe the plans may have been shaped, or even invented, by later storytellers in the tradition of the Alexander romance, who often attempted to present Alexander as a world-conquering visionary without limits. Whether entirely authentic or not, these last plans reveal how posterity remembered Alexander, not simply as a military commander, but as a ruler who imagined a unified world, reshaped through cities, culture, and shared human bonds.